Hi, I'm Jane Farnham from Great British Talent, and welcome to our series of video podcasts where we meet our very talented pool of speakers who are all available for your corporate events. So it's essentially an opportunity to find out more about our speakers, what they talk about, and how they can help you add value to your business on your corporate days. So today I'm saying hello to Beatrice Kabutakapua. Did I say that correctly, Beatrice?
Perfect, Jane.
No way. That's some surname you've got there, lady. I love it. So we'll get on to all the storytelling and the content in just a moment. But briefly, I just wanted to say thanks for joining me today. And also, let's start with your background. How did you arrive here today as a keynote speaker?
Yeah, that's always a very interesting question for me to answer because I always have to go back to my story. So once upon a time, now I won't start that far away, but my background is in journalism and PR. So I started in PR and then I worked for a very long time as a freelance journalist. And I really loved the fact that I had this opportunity to share other people's stories, but I never had to touch my own. So I felt quite safe in that. But then I started working on a documentary series on African migrants in different cities of the world. And I remember this one time there was this man we interviewed in Istanbul, and he asked me, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, the representation of migrants, it's important to represent them in a different way. But then he insisted, he was like, "Yeah, but why you?" And I think that question mixed with my experience and with the love that I had with stories and writing in general really helped me to look inward into my own story, into my own journey. And there were so many things that I discovered that I had forgotten. It came out, so much clarity came out of this process. It took a very long time. But then eventually I realized how powerful it was to own my story and then to share it as well, because I could be more visible. I could, share my perspective. I could understand exactly who I wanted to support and how. So that's how I started to work as a business storytelling coach. It was for me a way to help other at the beginning it was entrepreneurs, but help other entrepreneurs and leaders to find their own stories and then own it and then share it, because it's a whole process. And then many of the entrepreneurs I was working with were working in the corporate sector before running their own businesses. And then I started working within the corporate sector as well. So that's how I started with my story, then their stories. And then eventually you realize that the impact that you can have by speaking to larger groups, it's so great that it will be a disservice if I didn't, share my knowledge with as many people as possible.
So it sounds quite straightforward, be your authentic self, but tell me more about the storytelling and how that can help leaders, bring about change in their business for the better and also in profits, I suppose, because that's a lot of what businesses come down to.
Yeah, if we think about the profit part first, consumers today are much more aware of what's happening in companies, and they make their decisions based on that. And they make their decisions based on the individuals that they follow within those companies. So there's no there's an opportunity anymore to just share the product, right? Or to just share the service of the company. It's about what the company stands for, is about the culture, is about the values. And as much as you can advertise those values externally, then at some point you will have to demonstrate that the same values are also internal of the company. And that's where oftentimes there is a friction, because what is shared outside is not seen inside. And that's where the work of leaders comes in. It's about sharing their stories so that they can attract the right talent, but it's also about sharing their stories so that they can be, in a way, the ambassadors of the company. And then there is another level as well onto that, which is sharing your story as a leader to be more visible as a leader. So if you're thinking about changing your role, if you're thinking about being seen by senior stakeholders, if you're thinking about influencing decisions within the organization, sharing your story and being able to become a very powerful storyteller helps so much with that.
So, are you able to share with us then a powerful example of how a leader that you've worked with has experienced this transformation through storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many examples that come to mind. One recent example is a leader who participated in one of the business storytelling sessions I ran, and it was as part of a leadership development program. And when they joined the leadership development program, the session on storytelling, their fear was around, yeah, but what is my story? I don't know what's my story. And instinctively, you just get very confused and very lost with this question, what's my story? Because then there are so many different questions that come in, and they were really struggling with this part of the session. Historically, they've been a leader who is very quiet, who didn't show up who didn't put themselves forward for anything that relates to visibility. And then I spoke with them a couple of months ago because I was collecting their feedback and their experiences for my book, and they shared with me that just a few weeks after the sessions that I ran, they were starting to, put themselves a little bit forward, just a little bit. And that tiny effort helped them to connect to other senior stakeholders. They managed to create more lasting relationship, stronger relationship, and eventually that led to them being part of one of the campaign of the company. And they told me that that would have never happened if they hadn't had the chance to work on their stories and understand what their story was. So that's one of the examples that come to mind, but there are so many. And the wonderful thing is that it takes so little to actually get things moving.
Mm. So, what are the commonest mistakes to avoid in terms of storytelling?
Hmm. So when it comes to storytelling within an organization, the very first mistake that I see is the assumption that storytelling is something that, relates to TEDx talks or books or anything but not leadership related. And the reason why that happens is because the idea of storytelling is about the performance of the story. So when I go onto the stage and I share the story, or I go into a meeting and I share the story, but what we don't see about storytelling is what comes before that. And we also don't see what are the skills related to sharing a story. Sharing a story is almost the last part of the storytelling process. At the very beginning, the idea is to focus on the audience. So to listen to the audience. What do they need? What do I need to share with them? What will be relevant for them? Then you share the story. And after you've shared the story, especially within the company, you need to take action. So sharing a story is just one piece of the whole storytelling process. And that's one of the assumptions that so many leaders and so many organizations make around storytelling.
So, if somebody decided they want to change things today, transform things, what practical first steps can they take in terms of connecting to their story, to their leadership?
Mm. It seems counterintuitive, but the very first thing will be to spend some time finding their stories. So we always assume that we know what our stories are, right? So because we think about where we were born, how we grew up, and all these different elements. But we seldom think about the lessons that we have learned. Leaders don't, especially leaders who have been historically underestimated, they don't think about their challenges and how those have taught them some lessons. And there are all these pieces of their life journey that they don't explore because A, they don't think they're relevant, B, they don't think they're relevant to their leadership role. However, we bring our full selves at work. not in terms of showing up authentically, but in terms of our lived experiences, our trauma, our triggers. It comes all at work, fortunately and unfortunately. So why not thinking about how other pieces of the story have influenced your leadership journey? So yeah, the very first step that I will take is to have some reflective time and to think about, okay, what does my journey look like, and what are the lessons that I've learned from the good things, from the bad things, from the trauma, from the career, from everything.
So yeah, reflection, doing a bit of, I suppose, reflection into your whole experience. And would
Mm.
you jot that down? Would you journal that and sort of say, well, from this experience, which I consider to be an awful negative experience, I learned this, and see, would you write it down? Would you just sit and think about it? Would you
Yeah,
share that with anybody, or is it just something, a personal journey that you have to go through?
yeah, that's a good question, because it's not necessary to share it with someone else. That's part of the journey that you do by yourself, and not and this is not to say that you do it alone. You can do it in a group setting. You can do it with a coach. You can do it with a group of people who are going through the same transformation, the same path, the same journey, but definitely write it down in some, in some way. It can be written, it can be drawing, it can be bullet point. It doesn't really matter, as long as you have some receipts of your reflection.
Mm. Okay. Um, and I know you sort of broach upon inclusivity. And so, how does storytelling and inclusivity within leadership intersect?
Yeah, you know if you think about it, Jane, stories do not have gender, heritage, age. Everyone can share a story. So just the fact that it's something that it's accessible to everyone, it makes it in a way a tool that can easily be used by anyone. That's one thing. The second thing is that sharing stories help people to be visible. And we know that when people are visible, we can also start thinking about, oh, if that person is doing that, and they have this disability, and they have this heritage, and they have this gender orientation, and they have this religion, then I can too, if I feel like I belong one of these communities, right? So it's part due to the fact that it's an accessible tool. It's part due to the fact that it gives the right visibility, and it's also part due to the fact that it helps leaders as well be more influential. So it's about the pathway, the journey that the leader themselves take, and how they can become more influential and they can become more senior. But it's also about who is looking at them,
Mm.
and how they can feel empowered into saying, oh, actually, I can do it as well. I have an example right here. I can see them.
Do you think a lot of storytelling is about empathy for each
Hmm.
other's journeys?
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot about empathy. There needs to be some empathy, but there needs to be empathy for the people you are relating with, your audience, your team, whoever you're sharing the story. But there needs to be lots of empathy for the storyteller as well. So the journey that you go through when you are discovering your story, when you are finding the different elements of your journey, that also needs to be approached with lots of empathy. We don't want anyone to blame themselves or to judge themselves.
Mm.
The empathy needs to start from the leader, and then once you practice it, it becomes even easier to connect to others. And then if you think about it, once we know the human behind the role, it's much more easier to have empathy towards them.
Have you ever had any pushback in somebody saying to you it's too soft a skill for today's sort of busy, manic world? And you know, what's your thoughts on that?
I'll give my diplomatic answer here.
Give your diplomatic answer first, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty.
So the diplomatic answer is that leadership is not just about the ability of giving instructions. It's actually not about giving instructions to your team, to your people, or to whoever you're guiding, right? It's not about just simply saying, this is what we have to do, this is how we have to do it, and that's it. It's really about empowering others to take action and sharing them what are the values and what is the reason behind those actions. And when you do that, the the effects, the results that you see are so much more different.
Mm.
And when you inspire people to take actions based on some values, and when you explain to them why they're doing what they're doing, the motivation will be greater. And for me, there is nothing soft about that.
Mm.
It's much more efficient in terms of communication, in terms of human relationship. We are not, we are not machines.
No.
So the way we relate and the way we motivate each other, and we are motivated. It's coming from those connections. It's coming from knowing, okay, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I understand why leaders are telling or are sharing this with me. So I definitely don't see it as a soft
No.
skill, and it's a skill that we see in so many leaders.
Mm.
And it doesn't matter what their gender is, although when there is a difference of gender, I would like to point out that there is, the skill becomes softer when it's women storyteller and when it's men storyteller. But we see leaders being amazing storytellers, and we never question that. But then when it's time for employees or for the leadership development programs, and when it's time for that, to for those spaces to think about, oh, business storytelling, then it becomes a soft skill.
Mm.
Because the idea is that the assumption is that we are born storyteller.
Mm.
So if Barack Obama is so great at speaking in public and connecting to people and motivating people, is because he was born like that. He wasn't.
Mm.
No one is born a storyteller. It's something, or maybe some people are, but it's something that you nurture. It's a skill. It's
Yeah.
something that you can learn and you can develop.
Yeah, well, that's good to know, because a lot of people would claim not to be creative and be able to tell a story. So to be able to know that you could empower your workforce that way is great.
Yeah.
What do you love most about speaking, Beatrice?
Oh, what do I love most about it? I struggled at the beginning, not with the speaking part, but with the after of the speaking, because I didn't know I am an introvert. So I had this moment where I had this hype of speaking and I love interacting with people. And then after, I would be so depleted and I would be like, what's happening? What's going on? And it's just a matter of reminding myself that I need time off to regain my energy. But
Mm.
in terms of what I love about speaking, there are different things. The first one, and this is in a way the evolution of my own story, is that I can be visible in a way that works for me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas growing up, I was always visible because of how others were seeing me.
Mm.
So in a way, it's a matter of, I wouldn't say power, but empowerment for myself. The second thing is, when you speak and you look at your audience, and you can really, they have those moments where they really go, they have those light bulb moment, and you really realize, oh, they just had one of those moments.
Mm.
That's something that really I find so rewarding, but it's also an answer to my own mission. And then I like having the conversations after, because with the speaking, you lay out the conversation, you explain, you inspire, you motivate. But then it's so interesting to also interact with people after
Yeah.
the speaking engagement. And I will add a fourth thing, just because I recently met someone who was in the audience when I did a keynote speech last year during a festival in internal communication, and it was last year during the summer. I met this person a couple of weeks ago at another event, and they couldn't really remember my name, but they said, I feel like we know each other. And I said, I don't know, maybe I started to list some possible events. And she would just stare at me and she said, no, wait, you spoke at this festival and you talk. And she went on for the next couple of minutes. She just summarized the entire keynote that I gave. And that was a year ago. And she said how much it has impacted work. And that felt so, to leave a mark on people felt so great. So yeah, many things that I love about
I
speaking.
can see you love it. Well, Beatrice, thank you so much for your time today. I've really loved talking to you and finding out more about the empowerment of storytelling.
Thank you so much, Jane.
Oh,
Thanks.
it's been a pleasure. Now, if you'd like to find out more about Beatrice and how she could empower your employees through the art of storytelling, then don't forget you can email us, jane@greatbritishtalent.com, or you can call us anytime, 01753 439 289. See you next time.